Hello and welcome to the 2021 edition of NCSMI News. I'm Bridget Nally from East Chapel Hill High School.
And I'm Kevin Hurl-Woodard from North Raleigh Christian Academy. The theme of this year's North Carolina Scholastic Media Institute is Journalism Will Rise.
After a stressful pandemic school year, 99 students from 31 high schools are rising to the occasion and spending part of their summer learning more about journalism and media.
For the second year in a row, the Institute has had to go virtual because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Online learning is something most of us are used to by now. I talked to students about the challenge of taking classes both remotely and in the classroom.
Students have had an interesting school year. From Zoom calls to socially distanced classrooms, students have had to adapt and constantly change their learning environment. Matthew Nelson, a student at North Raleigh Christian Academy, was forced to quarantine at home after being contact traced at school.
Online school has its pros and its cons. Some of the pros are that you get longer breaks, and some of the cons are that the teachers mainly focus on the in-class students from what I saw than the online students, and it's harder to learn because you can barely see the board if the teacher has not posted questions on Schoology or has not put the questions that are on the board or the information that is on the board onto the screen so that the Zoom people can see them.
A recent survey shows that most high schools plan to be fully open this fall, giving students the chance to enjoy classes and extracurricular activities like they used to. In Raleigh, Kevin Hurl-Woodard, NCSMI News.
Students definitely had challenges going virtual, but what kind of impact has it had on teachers? Reporter Fabian Hernandez of Riverside High School has the story.
This past school year was like no other. Schools across North Carolina offered both online and in-person classes. Riverside High School teacher Mr. Christopher says there was a couple challenges, but the main one was
that kids' lives outside of school are just so varied, and it was hard to know and to expect a specific thing given their many different home lives. When they're in the building, we can control a lot of variables, but when we're not in the building learning as a group, there's just a lot more. There's just a lot more variability, a lot more to take into consideration as you're trying to lead online instruction.
Durham Public Schools started the first semester online and then opened their doors a second semester. Some teachers had the choice to stay at home or return back to the building. And others didn't, says 9th grade principal.
They didn't decide, so we had to come back, so we didn't have a choice, but I'm definitely glad to be here.
As the pandemic is winding down, many teachers say they're looking forward to see their students face-to-face once again this fall. In Durham, Fabian Hernandez, NCSMI News.
The decision to return to classrooms in the fall has a lot to do with the fact that more people are getting the COVID-19 vaccine. The shot is now available to anyone ages 12 and up. So how do high school students feel about getting vaccinated? Reporter Haley Ochoa of East Mecklenburg High School found out.
The COVID-19 virus has certainly impacted us all, and now that vaccine is out for both adults and teens, a weight has been lifted. But because the effects of the vaccine on young people haven't been studied as long, many are concerned about its safety. I talked to registered nurse Alois Ramirez.
Teens have taken part in the clinical trials of these vaccines. Among adolescents 12 to 15, without evidence of prior COVID infection, the efficacy was 100% 7 days after the second dose was administered to that of young adults in the clinical trials, according to the New England Journal of Medicine.
So, how are teenagers feeling about getting vaccinated?
I felt very achy in the body. I felt like I was getting a cold.
So the feeling we have towards this new COVID-19 vaccine for teens is, for me, in my opinion, I approve it because this virus attacks the oldest and the youngest one, and mostly the youngest because they're more vulnerable. So I encourage the young teens to get it and not be fooled around because of all the news saying that it's not worth it, because it is. It's about your health.
So it was really scary at first, just the thought of getting a vaccine for something as big as COVID. But after getting it, it was just a vaccine.
The latest studies show about 25% of American teens have received at least one shot of the vaccine. In Charlotte, North Carolina, Haley Ochoa, NCSMI News.
Before the pandemic, summer meant travel for many people, but that's not as easy anymore, especially if you're planning on going overseas. I talked to a North Carolina resident whose travel plans got a lot more complicated because of the pandemic.
As vaccination campaigns sweep the globe, life is beginning to return to normal for many. But one of the last aspects of pre-pandemic life to return is international travel. Just ask North Carolina resident Sophie Ashley.
I've now been living in the US for about 4 years. It's now been about a year and a half since we have last visited Australia, and we're currently in quarantine right now in Sydney to hopefully see our family soon.
The trip doesn't come without restrictions, however, as Australia has a policy of quarantining for 2 weeks in a hotel after entering the country. Although this mandatory isolation can be tough to handle at times, Sophie's family of 5 has been fortunate enough to find ways to make the stay interesting.
We've been having lots of fun. We keep busy every day by exercising a lot. My dad, he rented us out a treadmill and a bike that gets delivered to the apartment. And so we exercise, we play lots of Mario Kart, we read, we just kind of hang out all day.
While it's certainly not the experience that many of us are used to, international travel is expected to increase substantially over the summer as compared to the beginning of 2021. And for those who are now getting the chance to travel home, the restrictions and quarantines are an easy price to pay. In Chapel Hill, Bridget Nally, NCSMI News.
In the past year, many of us have found ourselves with more time on our hands because of quarantine. But as reporter Helman Scharouse of East Chapel Hill High School shows us, that extra time could turn out to be very productive.
A 2020 study conducted by OnePoll found that as a result of the pandemic, almost 2/3 of Americans have had more time on their hands to explore hobbies and complete odd jobs. The same certainly goes for students like East Chapel Hill High's Cece Harrison, who has found some unique ways to fill their free time.
I started focusing on a lot of new hobbies when the pandemic began. I started focusing on knitting. I also started gardening a lot more, taking opera lessons. We have quails. And now we have 18 of them, and we've been breeding them, and yeah, we have a lot of eggs. I also started working on writing songs on the piano.
Exercising, reading, and writing were also among the most popular pandemic hobbies. Among those polled, around 3/4 said that their extra free time to spend on hobbies was the highlight of their year. Harrison's feelings, though, are a bit more complicated.
I just had never had so much unlimited time on my hands, for better or for worse. I think that the pandemic has certainly allowed me to explore a lot more things in more in-depth ways. It's not really very fulfilling because you don't get to really share anything with the world, you know? I really do think that even though there was a lot more time, it definitely came at a price.
With more Americans vaccinated by the day and schools seemingly set to fully reopen in the fall, this summer could mark the end for many students' pandemic hobbies, for better or for worse. In Chapel Hill, I'm Helman Scharouse, NCSMI News.
For some high schoolers, being forced to stay inside inspired them to share their voices with the outside world. Joining us now is Emmanuel Izai of Doctors Charter School in Florida. Emmanuel, I heard you started a podcast. What's it about?
My podcast is about anything and everything sports, from FIFA to March Madness, from the World Cup to the college football brackets. Anything you can think of sports-wise, I do it.
And even though you started doing it during the pandemic, do you think you'll continue doing it?
At this point, it's become a necessity, and I really do think I actually have to do it.
Thanks so much, Emmanuel.
It's great to see students making the most of their talents during this pandemic. Bridget, what did you do during your extra time?
Well, I definitely spent a lot of time cooking and hanging out with my family. What about you?
I learned to play guitar.
That's great. Even though there were some advantages to being home a lot, I can't wait to get back to being in my favorite places and being able to socialize.
Me too. And fingers crossed next year, NCSMI will be back in person. But until then, on behalf of all of us in the broadcast division, have a safe and wonderful summer.